When you think about pipe organ, what are the first 5 things that come to your mind? For a lot of people, it's going to be loud and big and impressive and the king of instruments. But one of the ones that's absolutely going to be there is church. And it turns out a lot of organs are not actually in churches, and a lot of places in the world don't use them in religious expression at all. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the quote-unquote secular side of organ, concert halls, and all the other cool things that organ can do that you might not know about. First of all, a lot of people don't know that Japan is a huge center for pipe organ and that there are so many pipe organs all over in beautiful concert halls. But Japan is not a country where people go to church or are Christian or religious in that way, right? Another one is Russia. In Russia, people are Orthodox, and in most Orthodox traditions, people don't use the organ at all. It's just sung. But the organ there is a very popular instrument, and it's used in a concert context. Like, you have organs in concert halls at the Tchaikovsky Conservatory, but not in churches. One of the things that we take for granted is that organ has centuries-long performance tradition, and actually, there have been times where the only organs that persisted were the ones that weren't destroyed by Christians themselves. I'm sure you've heard the term iconoclast, and actually in the Netherlands during the Reformation times, a lot of people got very angry about all the things that were in churches that were symbolic, that reminded them of Rome and all of these extravagant things like golden crosses and all this kind of fancy stuff. And pipe organs fell under their line of attack as well. And so actually there was a time where Dutch people were like destroying pipe organs in churches, ripping them out. And some of the organs that survived this iconoclastic purge were the instruments actually in municipal centers like town halls. These organs were very fancy, right? They had clocks in them oftentimes. It was the most complicated thing that humans had made, pipe organs and clocks. And so you could show the wealth of your town or village that you had these things. And the people weren't allowed to destroy them or ruin them inside the city squares. But a lot of churches actually lost their organs in that time. In Protestantism in general, there was a real chance that we would not have had organs for a lot of it. And actually Martin Luther, very keen on the pipe organ, very keen on singing in church. Other reformers like Calvin, not so hot on accompaniment in worship and actually didn't really like it. Wanted psalms to just be sung pretty much in octaves and totally simply and all that kind of stuff. So the organ actually wasn't a given that it would be used everywhere. As a concert instrument, the organ kind of had its time and it almost died for a while. Like Mozart would play it, but he didn't really write much stuff for the organ, right? And he called it the king of instruments, but it wasn't super relevant in his day. The organ went through a bunch of new technological advancements and developments through the 19th century, and the kind of organs that emerged in France by the later part of the 1800s were a completely different instrument. Those organs, for example, had what we call sentient voicing, where as you play up the keyboard, the melodies actually get louder and louder, and so you can play melodic material that actually will soar above the accompaniment. So when you have someone like Franck writing organ music, he's actually kind of writing piano textures in some moments, but then has melodies playing over the top, and it works because of the technology. Organ has always been a technological thing, right? I like to call it an acoustic synthesizer, and even from the very early days, you had a lot of stops that were copying other real instruments that people knew. The organ's always been driven by technology, and just like any other kind of platform, the things you can do with it are kind of subservient to the technologies that you have. So you write music that is more and more adventurous based on what you can actually do with the instrument. There were, first of all, advancements called Barker levers that were little pneumatic pouches that made the keys physically easier to play, which meant you could have more stops. One of the really biggest developments, though, is what are called the expression pedals and putting part of the organ under expression. That means that you put a bunch of the pipes from the stops inside their own little rooms, and then you have pedals where you can actually open them and close them. And they'll kind of open these Venetian blinds that let the sound out. And the effect is finally direct volume control for the instrument. That helped other composers like Widor and Vierne and others before them start to be able to use the organ like an orchestra and be able to say, well, I'm going to write an actual symphony, except instead of being for a whole Philharmonic orchestra, it's for one person playing the organ, with sometimes a little bit of help on the sides. Speaking of help, the organ developed pistons and combination action in ways where you could pick all the stops that you wanted to use and then set them so that one person, instead of having console assistants all over the instrument, could just pull out whatever stops they wanted at the push of a button. Electrification was another innovation that allowed people to actually be able to put pipes wherever they want in the room, and that allowed you to do antiphonal effects, maybe, put some pipework at the back of the church, be able to surround choirs with music and kind of fill in the gaps. And then over time, ironically, we learned more and more about how organs used to be made. And so today, a lot of instruments are built in the style with the exact same alloys of metal and tin and lead and stuff that they used to make the pipes out of. And so we're actually able to put stops into instruments built right now this year that will reflect a certain kind of sound from a certain country or region from centuries ago. While the organ has a lot of sacred repertoire, and while many organs in the West are in churches, the organ as a just performance instrument actually has the biggest repertoire. We have about 800 years of music to play and to choose from. And we also know that the organ goes back before then. The pipe organ's ancestor is the hydraulis, a steam-powered instrument, and there's some evidence to suggest that in Rome, in the Colosseum, there were instruments like this that were powered off of steam, and that they would hype up the crowds and be sort of like noise machines. But what's really cool about the organ to me is that no two are exactly alike. And even if you built two identical instruments, the room is kind of part of the effect too. So you have to figure a room for an instrument is kind of like an amp for an electric guitar. And so you're never bored as an organist. You're always getting used to another space. You're always getting used to what your instrument can do and can achieve. So I get why Mozart called it the King of Instruments. I think that's a fair name. And I'm really excited because the organ has a bright future. New organs are being built every year all over the world. And organs are going in on all sorts of places. They're built in many, many countries. And what's neat is people will have an organ built in Canada and shipped to China, or people will have an organ built in Germany and shipped to Hong Kong. And it's sort of a big cultural exchange, and everybody's choosing different kinds of sounds, different kinds of styles, and then sending them to different schools, institutions, concert halls, where people will then play all kinds of new music on them. There's something about the organ that it's acoustic, it's real, it's physical. You can feel it in the floor. When you're in a building, you can, like, your chest cavity will shake when somebody plays organ music. It's really, really unique in that way. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you found it organically, it would help me so much if you would subscribe to my channel. I am YouTubing like it's 2010, and whatever happens to TikTok, I would really like to be able to make more longer form content, make that content better and better produced. And it would really help me if you signed up, and then I had people, and it would push it out further, and it makes it more like worth the time. So if you enjoyed this and you want to hear more stuff, subscribe, and if there's stuff you want me to talk about or play or whatever, please jump in the comments and put it right there below. And I'll probably see it because I'm just starting up YouTube again. Thank you so much.